Welcome back, modelers, to my messy workbench. The first episode, detailing this old Tamiya Sd.Kfz 222, we talked about some of the changes I made to the gun. I made a few others after that video, and I'll just quickly show you what I did. One is going to be the little shield. So that shield is going to go over the gun and inside of the turret. And also, I noticed on a photo, there's this tube. It's mounted on that lower arm, that diagonal arm that goes up and mounts to the inside front of the turret. It'll mount right there. And I don't know what it's for. If any of you do, let me know down in the comments. But what I did, I just made this, and I'll try and show you an actual photograph of what it is on the real vehicle. But I cut a piece of rod to the length that it looked like it was. And then for the clamps, it has these little clamps that, if you can picture, it looks like you just kind of shove this cylinder into them and it holds them in place. So kind of a spring steel kind of a thing. And I noticed that some knucklehead had dropped a beverage can in my yard, made of very thin aluminum. So out of that aluminum, I was able to cut some strips and to fashion those little metal clips. So here's a picture of the kit turret, just straight out of the box. And what I'll do is I'll flip it over so that you can get a better idea of some of the things that I'm changing. And I'll put some little arrows in here to indicate where everything will be going. First off, you'll notice towards the front of the turret, along each one of the slots where the guns and the gun sight will either poke through or look through, there are braces that should be right here. So I fashioned those out of sheet styrene, and this is how they look. So there's two on either side of where the main gun will elevate through. So just adding those little braces, where Tamiya once again had nothing in there, a little bit more of the three-dimensional effect. If I'm using that phrase wrong, I hope you know what I mean. There's just more to see. Let's put it that way. And you'll also notice right underneath the main gun cutout, there's a little upside down horseshoe, a little bracket. That is where the front gun mount will be received into. And as we get towards the back, you'll see where the rear goes. But that's pretty much what I've done to the front of the turret. Now on the sides of the turret, you'll notice where my arrows are, there's a couple little bumps. Well, those are actually where the vision ports will be situated. These vision ports, vision blocks, hatches, whatever you want to call them. I've seen a bunch of pictures where these were removed and it's just a piece of plate steel welded in their place. But then I've seen several where it's a complete hatch. And if you're familiar with the German hatches, they have a little mechanism that helps you keep them open. So I fashioned the interior of these hatches out of styrene rod and strip with a little bit of copper wire in there. The accuracy of these is not my main concern. I've really tried to get them as exact as I could without spending weeks on them. But you can see how big they are. And to the naked eye, as you're looking at these little armored cars, probably not going to draw a lot of attention to them, but it does add, once again, a little increased depth of detail. So I've just cemented those in place in the turret. It takes away that kind of a little portion of an inch plane of nothingness and turns it into something with some interest in it. So here's the opening for the back hatch. As you can see, the kit part untouched is the one on the bottom. And the one I've been working on, of course, is above that. And you can see how much wider that, by my estimation, this hatch should be. I just cut out the opening to make it a little wider, and then I kind of framed it back in a little bit. I still have to do some work. You can see if you look real close along the frame of the opening that I need to do a little more filling. What's funny is a lot of this stuff, I just can't see them until I photograph it and blow it up. I'm like, holy cow. I initially used the kit supplied hinges. I cut them off of the door of the hatch and was going to use those, but then I decided maybe I'll try and make some of my own, and these are going to be pretty freaking tiny, but what the heck. And here's a picture of what I did to the hatch itself. I cut it in two, and then I added a strip in there of styrene and then sanded it down. This still looks pretty rough, but it'll look quite a bit better once I'm done sanding it and making sure the contours are right. Then getting some primer on it to fill any kind of little scratches and gouges that might be there, and just continue to work on it with fine sandpaper. So let's look at the process I went through with making the little hinges for this hatch. So I started out with some 15 thousandths thick strip styrene. So I threw a penny down next to these little hinges I'm trying to make. I've let it dry for a couple days. When you get pieces this small, they tend to get pretty soft with almost any type of cement that you use. I was using Tamiya, but I've also used some that aren't quite as hot or aggressive. Still have the same problem with the parts getting soft when they're this small. So I'll glue them together and I'll let them sit and let all of that extra cement evaporate and let the plastic harden up again. I've got this blade here that it's similar to an X-Acto number 10, but a little bit shorter, but I like the curved cutting edge on it, so I don't have to get just perfect down here when I want to cut these. So I'm going to trim each one of these off just below that rod that I've cemented them to, and then I'm going to do a little work with a real fine razor saw, and I'll let you see what that looks like when I'm done. So that's them with some of the excess trimmed off, and now I'm going to do the fun part, I hope, which is cutting the little profile for the actual hinge look. So one side will have 2 notches, the other side will have 1 notch, and hopefully they'll kind of indent into each other, forming a hinge. And we'll see how that looks. So I'll see if I can focus this. There we go. So you kind of see where I'm making these little tiny slots with a razor saw. And this will become more evident what I'm doing here when I get the rest of the material removed and starts to look more like a hinge. But I'm using this little saw here. Back when I bought this guy, and this is a set of photo etched stainless steel saws that I've been using for a long time, and they still work pretty well. Now, I don't think Trumpeter still makes them, but the exact same kit is available from Hasegawa, and they're about 30 bucks. And you get, I don't know, about a dozen different saws. This is the fine tooth one. They also have some that are a little coarser tooth. But man, they have been indispensable for me in making little tiny cuts and real precision cuts, much finer than what I can get with my X-Acto saws. So anyway, let's do a little more work and see what the hinges turn out looking like. So here's kind of where we're at with the hinge. I can get my little X-Acto knife down here. So what I'm going to do from this point is I'm going to add a little bit of epoxy putty just above these hinge barrels to give them more of that folded over look like the hinge would have had. And I might even shim this part up a little bit to close that gap. So it'll be a lot neater looking once all that's done, and of course once paint is on it. And this hat's going to be open, so the illusion will be a little better in that the hinge won't be closed and looking like this. It'll be open and on different planes, so it'll look a little better. But anyway, this thing is freaking tiny, and will look, to the naked eye, looks a lot better because it's, it's way out here. So keep that in mind with scale effect, and when you're looking at a model, you're typically not doing it with a magnifying glass, even though it would be a lot more precise to have this made out of photo etch. The game I'm playing right now is to try and make all of this without using any photo etch, or with as little as possible. So anyway, there's my hinge. I've got one more to make. One other thing that I've done, and I've noticed on some of the photos that I've seen of the turret, is that there are some subtle but evident weld beads where these armor plates were joined together, and they're not represented on the kit whatsoever. So I just dug a little trough right there and fashioned some weld beads. But here's some practice ones that I made, and you can tell I've made it out of Kneadatite, or the old Duro putty that's a yellow and blue mix. This is kind of a waxy putty, and it holds up real well with small detail. And so it worked pretty good for my weld beads. So I'll show you how I did these when we get to the hull. Towards the back of the turret will be a couple neat little items. Right at the very back, there'll be another mount for the rear portion of the gun mount where it attaches to the turret. There'll be a little bit of a mechanism by that hatch we just talked about. And there will also be attached to, if you're looking down God's eye view, top of the turret, towards the back, just to the right of the rear of the gun will be a folding little triangular seat. And on the other side, there is a radio that goes into a bracket that'll hang down below the turret itself. Won't be able to see much of these things because of the tight quarters. It's pretty dark, so on and so forth. But we'll still throw some detail on there, and I'll show you how I build those items. So what I've done is kind of fake some measurements onto this solid piece of rod. If you can see my pencil drawing there, that's going to be about the size of the radio. Good old miter box. And I'm sure one of these slots will be pretty close to fit. And it just takes a few swipes with a razor saw to get this thing cut through. So now I need to trim off that little section on the bottom, and that'll give us a pretty rough outline for our radio. So I've got the rough shape of the radio box cut out and sanded down a little bit. And now I'm going to come up with a face for the radio. So I've got this little piece of plastic. Let's see how thick it is. It's 10 thousandths by 150 thousandths. So I'll just kind of mark this right there. And I will cut that off. And it's on this little face that will put the detail for the radio. I've got a little piece of 10 thousandths thick strip styrene. It's about 30 thousandths wide, and I'm going to surround the face of the radio with this to give it just a little bit more of a 3D effect. You can see that plainly on the pictures of the radio, that there is a flange that goes all around the perimeter of the radio face. So I've surrounded the box for the radio with some of that strip styrene I told you about. You can see my little shortcut for having to measure all the pieces is I just put it on like a pinwheel, and I'll trim it off once this cement has set up. Now for the face of this, I'll show you some still photos and talk over it. But there's a few dials on there, and one of the ways I came up with making one of the dials, I went through it a couple different times. Here's one that I played around with, but I didn't like. You still see that upside down smile there that has this little guy here that's going to have some sort of a readout inside of here on the dials when you're tuning it. It turned out okay, but I was going to try a different experiment. So what I'm going to do is with my punch and die set, I'm going to poke a hole in this, and with the disc that comes out, I'll poke a hole, or I'll punch a disc out of it. So I'll basically be left with a ring, and then with that center disc, I'll trim off part of it and trying to give me a little better rendition of this window through which you'll see the frequency numbers or whatever it is. And then we'll have a couple plugs that go on here. One of them will plug into the antenna. The other plug comes out to, I'm assuming, a headset. So we'll plot along with that and see how we do. Well, I started to carve this plug, and this part here is the one that's going to be actually plugged into the face right up here of the radio. Then I'll cut it off about right there, and we'll have a wire coming out of it. So that's how I'm going to do both the plugs. I just take this piece of strip styrene and I carve what I want out of it. And I like to leave it attached because it gives me a little more stable platform to be fiddling around with the files and the X-Acto blade and so on. So anyway, we'll go from here. So I've carved my little plugs, and you can see how they turned out. I'm going to have to drill some little tiny holes in there so I can attach some some fine copper wire. So we'll see how well I'm able to do that without destroying these little guys. But anyway, that's how they look so far. Now for the antenna base, this is what I started off with. I saw a picture that had this insulator, or whatever you want to call it, at the base of the antenna. This is the mount that'll be attached to the turret. And then you've got this antenna base. And that picture is the only one I saw that looked like that. And I wasn't really too happy with it. So I started fiddling around trying to get another one made, and oops, come back here. And that one just looks gross. So I have a third one. Let's see if I can show you. So what I did is I just punched out some discs with my little Waldron punch set, and I shaved off the corners, or a little portion of those discs, and then I made punched out another disc for the bottom of this. So let me show that to you. So not getting a whole lot of shadow action so you can see what's going on, but there's a disc on the bottom of it. And then all these other guys are just portions of discs that I've glued in there. There's 4 of them, so every 90 degrees I glued one in. And I have it on this rod just so I can have something a little bigger to handle as I'm working with this. So I'm going to sand these guys down a little bit, and then I'll put another disc over the top of it, and then the antenna, of course, will go in there. This is too thick for an antenna, but I'll chop it off about right there and then hollow it out for, we'll see if I put an antenna in it or not. Most of the pictures that I see just have the base and don't have an antenna on there, but we'll see. You see that? So I got that little guy punched out, little disc, and then I tried to bore a hole in the center of it so it looks like a washer, but that'll be the top part of my antenna. Let's see if I can get this to work right. So I'm just going to thread it onto this. Now let's keep trying here. And put it down on the top of that. And that's looking like a much better base for my antenna. You can see that. So I'll glue that up and call that just about done. The last thing I want to show you about the antenna mount is something I'm going to put onto the side of it. Basically, it's a little clamp that, if you can imagine the antenna going down into the mount, they have a little thumb screw they'll turn to tighten up the mount around the antenna so it stays in there. So this is part of it, a little tube that's going to be put on horizontally on the base of that antenna. I've made a little notch in it, semicircle, so it'll snug up to the base of the antenna. And then finally I've whittled out a little thumb screw. Well, the final part of building the turret for me would be tackling these safety screens. These are hinged. They come in halves, so left and a right half. Then they close up the top of the turret to prevent like hand grenades being thrown in and bouncing around inside of the hole, since it's an open turreted armored car. The problem with the kit supplied safety screens is that they're huge and they're the wrong shape. So if we look at this guy, so in my estimation, that piece that I've made out of the strip styrene is the right size, or closer to the right size. So you can see that these safety screen frames are way too tall. Plus, if we go back to this, you can see that the shape is all wrong for what Tamiya gave us. I'll try not to rock this camera too much. So if you notice that towards the rear of each one of the screens, there's a radius, a little scallop in there. And Tamiya's does not have that. And there's a little notch. Once these things close, if you can notice right here, that notch is where that part of the gun elevation mechanism, this guy right here, will protrude through the safety screen. So I've made an attempt several times to make these guys both out of just strips of styrene. I've attempted to cut them out of sheets of styrene and sand them to shape. I've tried 2 or 3 different things, and none of them are really making me happy yet. This is as close as I've seen to what I want the final result to be. So I'm going to keep on whacking away. Here's some of the side pieces that I've made. And here's actually one that I made earlier that turned out okay for a minute, but then I broke it. These guys here, I'll show you pictures of ones I tried to make out of styrene. Then I just decided to bend them out of brass. They attach to the exterior of these safety screens, and they're hinged. And I'm not sure what they do. So if any of you guys know, let me know. But they're going to go on top of those. And then there's a mechanism right there that holds these safety screens open. There'll be one on either side, and I'll actually show you a picture of what the real one looks like. So this is, and of course I just made that out of some sheet and strip styrene, cut a little disc with my hole punch. Let me see if I can turn this over so you can see. There we go. And I've put little bolts on there. And once again, I did this just to add a little bit more detail because they're very evident when those safety screens are open, and mine are going to be open. So I'm not going to include any more of that in this video because it's going to take a while for me to get these where I want them. So when I finally get all this together, the last thing that's going to go on here is the screen. And what Tamiya gave me in this kit was this, and it's just way too thick and clunky. I did find some that Edward makes in a photo etch mesh. Well, gang, that's it for this video. The next video will be about the hull, the interior of the hull that I've worked on this old Tamiya Sd.Kfz 222. I hope you guys have enjoyed what I've been trying to show you and maybe been a little inspired to do some scratch building on your own. And I hope you have time to get to the bench and enjoy this hobby. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.